Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, the Catholic Church has a new leader, Pope Leo XIV. So who is he?
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.
In Domine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
On this occasion, the Catholic Church wasn't hanging about. Once upon a time, it took 3 years to elect a pontiff. On Thursday, after just 2 days of conclave, Cardinal Robert Prevost became Pope Leo XIV. He's the first American pope from Chicago, the deep pan pontiff, according to some pizza-loving wags. Based in Peru for many years, he was the first to speak in Spanish from the balcony in St. Peter's Square. And as he gave his first Mass as Pope Friday morning, the Catholic Church, indeed the whole of the world, began to wonder what his time as God's representative on earth might actually look like. Sky's Barbara Serra was in Rome. Good to see you, Barbara. Of course, you are one of our presenters, but also Catholic, also Italian. I mean, you were in the square, St. Peter's Square.
I was, and it's my third conclave as well, but for this one, usually I report on it from a live point, watching it in a way on a screen as well. But I was actually in the square, and it was amazing, and it was quite unexpected, because people thought it was going to come a little bit later. So I'm going to confess to you that quite a lot of people and journalists, I know of at least one news team that had gone to get an ice cream, and then had to run back when the white smoke happened. And it was about an hour, wasn't it, from the white smoke to when Pope Leo XIV appeared on the balcony. So there was sort of a party atmosphere and excitement. And there were big screens on the side of the square. So you could see on the screens a lot of confusion when the name was announced, because, of course, he was mentioned, but he was nowhere near the top 10, right, if you will. So there was a lot of who in the crowd, and then checking on mobiles, the ones that worked, whose reception's always a bit sketchy in those situations. Huge surprise at the name. And it has to be said, huge surprise at the nationality, an American.
So Leo XIV, not one of those names that was necessarily mentioned amongst the runners and riders, but he was close to Pope Francis.
He was appointed cardinal quite recently, actually, by Pope Francis. And there's a lot of similarities between the men. So, our top line, and I think it is right to say first American Pope is in United States, but certainly even in the crowd. And then, if you follow some social media algorithms from South America, very much claiming, they're all saying it's the second Latin American Pope. Because, of course, born in the States, born in Chicago, but spent a long time in Peru. And it was interesting during his speech, he spoke in Italian, near perfect Italian. I'm assuming his Spanish is near perfect as well, because he was there for a long time. But he addressed his diocese in Peru of Chiclayo. And so and there was quite a big South American or Spanish-speaking contingent there, probably because of Francis. So they're saying we have another Pope from the global South, Latin America. But of course, we see it, and I think rightly so in a way, as an American Pope.
Let's wind the clock back just a little bit then. Tell me more about that time when he was, of course, not Leo XIV, but Cardinal Prevost. And before that, Father Prevost.
So he's a member of the Augustine order. So, you get these orders in Catholicism, a little bit like the Jesuits that Francis was. Very much focused on missionary work, very much focused on working with parishes and education as well. And so he went to Peru in the 80s as a missionary, did a lot of work there, then went back to the States, but then came back and eventually became Archbishop of Chiclayo. Now, if you hear the stories, very much loved there, it has to be said. And so a lot of the people there saying he was very much the kind of man that would get stuck in. So when they had, I think, torrential rains in a part of Peru, he went in wading through rain and big wellies and really helping out. He has on occasion spoken against the government when he felt that they were too hard on dissent.
Listening to you discuss Leo XIV, I'm getting the same kind of street preacher vibes that we had when it came to Francis's background?
So I think there's a lot of similarities and I think there's differences. I think there is that, that missionary spirit, that look to the global south, that attention to the poor, very much. You see that in both men, the building bridges as well. And again, it's something that he mentioned in his speech. And crucially, he mentioned peace in his speech. It came up time and again. And when we think of how strong Pope Francis was on issues like the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, I wonder whether we're going to see that again. There are differences, and it's differences of doctrine. So, there's all these words we throw around: liberal, conservative, moderate, the compromise candidate. Again, we'll see where he takes it. And I think the world has also changed since Francis became Pope. But on issues like the blessing of homosexual unions, which Francis had allowed some, archbishops to allow at their discretion in their regions, from what we understand, he's not that enthusiastic about that. The whole issue of women deacons that even Francis hadn't really managed to push through. Again, it's something that we don't think, he's necessarily going to follow Francis's direction.
Well, let's focus on nationality for a second. Dual national, of course, is Peruvian identity, part of it. But it's America that people have fixated on. And honestly, do we think that this will have been part of the calculus that the cardinals will have been involved in whilst in conclave?
So, first of all, I really want to emphasize the point of just how jaw-dropping it was when it was found out that he was American. It was sort of this unwritten rule that it couldn't be an American, for the simple reason that you don't want to concentrate too much power in what is already, the world's main superpower. And so I don't think that the conclave was trying to choose someone that would, cater to Trump or be gentle about his policies. But I do think there is a change in the mood music. And that's the other thing. It's not just Trump. It's U.S. Catholics. Remember that in the Catholic Church, and they are having huge financial issues right now. But when it comes to donations, it's basically the collection plate that goes around every church that you go to during Mass. Around a third of the donations around the world come from the United States, right? Big Catholic community there. 56% of those Catholics voted for Donald Trump. So it may also have been just, a nod saying Americans are not automatically excluded from the papacy, even if it just says that, right? I mean, who knows what their reasoning was. But the mere fact that we're all talking about it does mean that, there was a message there. Although, mind you, the Christian right in the States, certain members are already having a go at him. So it's not going to be easy for him. And, one last thing, language. The fact that he speaks English with an American accent, because that's what he is. I think that will also perhaps reconnect a lot of American Catholics with the Vatican.
And what should we be looking out for in the coming days and weeks? Signals about the way in which this Pope may carry out his duties, little hints as to the direction the Catholic Church may be going in under his papacy?
One of the criticisms towards Pope Francis is that the church felt decentralized. So, for example, the issue of blessing gay couples, right? Which in the West, most of us would think, yeah, fair enough, right? Not marriage, because the church thinks marriage is between a man and a woman, but blessing gay couples, or even giving communion to divorcees, remarried divorcees, which actually affects a lot of people, especially in the West. So it'll be interesting to see what he does on those things, because what Francis had done is that he'd given a lot of leeway to a lot of archbishops around the world. So we know in parts of Africa, a lot of the cardinals, archbishops there didn't agree with it. So Francis allowed them to sort of do their own thing, and others in perhaps more liberal Western countries to go another way. But what does that create? A slightly decentralized church and a slightly less powerful or influential Vatican. But certainly when I was in Rome, a lot of the criticisms that I heard from people that love the Vatican, they said, look, if you're going to keep together a congregation of 1.4 billion people, which isn't easy anyway, actually you have to centralize, because otherwise it just kind of loses the impact it has to have around the world.
Barbara, as you say, reform in the Catholic Church moves at a glacial pace. Equally, though, the Catholic Church ain't going anywhere anytime soon. How important is this papacy to the future of the Catholic Church, would you say?
I think it's an interesting time, both in the way people see faith. Certainly in the West, in Europe, actually, not the US so much, but in Europe, we have seen a decline in church attendance. It's slightly ticking up again in the UK post-COVID, but still not at pre-COVID levels. So the future of the church will be interesting. I think, what really struck me when I was in the crowd, when he came out, what he was wearing, actually. Because when Francis came out, he was just wearing a really simple, we remember those pictures, quite a simple sort of white papal garb. Whereas he came out with the full look. So he had the red mozzetta, which is that little cape that sort of goes to his elbows. He had the red shoulder cape, the embroidered in gold. He also had the proper papal cross, whereas Francis had gone with his own crucifix around his neck. And I think that that was a message about tradition. And so I think in the Catholic Church, reform is always a strange word because they will say we have survived 2,000 years because actually we know what we're about. Now, they do reform, obviously, but it's very slow. So I think what we're going to see is him sort of trying to change a little bit, but still rooted in tradition.
Thanks, Barbara. So, what of the job itself? What challenges await Pope Leo as he begins his time as Bishop of Rome? Father Thomas Massaro is Professor of Religion at Fordham University in New York. He's written extensively on Catholicism, including 2 books on Pope Francis. Father, your thoughts on the election of Pope Leo?
Yes, I had no particular insight into the minds of the 133 electors. I'm on record in recent interviews as saying that an American was highly unlikely, the probability close to 0. Well, once again, I was wrong. So, of course, we're all happy. First of all, it's very sad to have the death of a pope and then over 2 weeks of having no spiritual leader in our church. We have a 2 Latin word phrase, sede vacante, the Holy See, the seat is empty. And now it's filled with a very promising, energetic man. He's 69 years old, but that's actually quite young by papal selection standard. What I have heard other people saying in the last 20 hours is that Cardinal Prevost was the least American of the 10 American cardinals in that conclave out of 133 cardinals. And I can understand that. He spent 20 years in Peru and at least 15 years in Rome. So that's more than half his life was in a country outside the United States, gives him a broad perspective.
Do you think, though, the specific president at the moment, Donald Trump, might not have been a factor in the minds of those cardinals? I'll put it to you the way The Economist, not necessarily an inverted commas Roman Catholic publication, but the way The Economist has put it. The election of an exceptionally cosmopolitan American smacks of outright defiance of Donald Trump and his aggressive nationalism.
I do read The Economist. I value its opinions and commentary. I don't disagree with that sentence, but I would just say it was probably not the first thing on the minds of the cardinals. So in choosing an American who isn't all that American in the sense of spending half his life outside the United States, sure, that came into play, but maybe only as a minor factor. And don't forget, President Trump will be gone in 3.75 years, and I expect this Pope to last a good long time. So viva Pope Leo XIV, and I expect him to be in for a good long time.
But the man who may well succeed Donald Trump, his current vice president, J.D. Vance, is of course Catholic himself, met with Francis, the last public figure to meet with Francis. And I'm wondering how important that relationship may well be for the Vatican and indeed for the White House.
The new Pope has a social media footprint, and he did post on X or Twitter just 2 months ago a riposte, a response to something that Vice President J.D. Vance said about migration. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but obviously a Catholic prelate, like a cardinal or a pope, would be in favor of respecting the rights of migrants. So when J.D. Vance made a statement quoting St. Thomas Aquinas, the church's greatest theologian, misconstruing his words, the new pope posted a response. And those 2 words, by the way, were ordo amoris, the order of loves. Now, yes, Thomas Aquinas used that phrase, but he didn't use it as Vance interpreted it to take away the importance of loving all people. We Catholics and all Christians believe in the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's what love is about, reaching out beyond all boundaries. It's not about drawing lines and saying, well, I only have enough resources to care for my family. That was the Vance version, and the new Pope criticized him for that. We may see more fighting on Twitter or X because now he controls @Pontifex. So keep your eye on for that.
Another area in which Pope Leo will have to tread carefully is the manner in which he continues to deal with the Catholic Church's history of abuse. How does Leo go about restoring the moral authority that may well have been lost in those dark days?
Yes, well, of course, this is the worst scandal that has plagued the Roman Catholic Church in my lifetime and maybe since the Middle Ages. So Pope Francis has a mixed record. It was a pretty good record, but it wasn't perfect. And there were things about the enforcement of disciplines against those who were credibly accused of sexual abuse. To his credit, he changed canon law, making it much more strict against priests who were accused of clerical and sexual abuse. So that's some major changes. They were good, and people still claim that they weren't enough. The new incoming Pope, Leo, has a doctorate in canon law. He's a very smart man, and I suspect he is dedicated to changing the laws even further to prevent abuse before it occurs.
I suppose the problem that he has, if indeed it is a problem, is that there are survivor groups who have suggested that Leo, back of course when he was a priest, before his time as a cardinal in the Vatican, that he overlooked allegations of abuse.
He was, for 12 years, the head in Rome. It's called the Friar General or the Prior General of the Augustinian Order. For those 12 years, many of these abuse cases, allegations against priests in his religious order, would come from all over the world. And you have to sort out what are the allegations that sound like they're credible, which are the allegations that sound like they're just made up out of whole cloth to have a lawsuit. And I'm sure that somebody can dig up a claim that he overlooked a credible charge and didn't treat it with utmost seriousness. Then he was transferred to Peru. I wouldn't be surprised if some charges about priests in his diocese in Peru still are lingering and people have complaints that he didn't handle them correctly. Again, I think of his personal qualities very highly. I think he deserves the words of praise, and let's just see what he does.
And Father, as Leo embarks on this journey as pontiff, and as you say, he will be in this role for quite some time, God willing, of course. How would you characterise what the next few years would be like? Do you have an inkling from the CV, from the biography, from the roles that he has had, of the direction in which you think Leo will be taking this church?
I'll be reading the tea leaves just like everyone else. About Wednesday, he'll probably pick that day or the next day to give his first, it's called the inaugural Mass of the pontificate. And he'll be laying out his plans, his priorities. What do I expect to be in there? Some mention of migrants, refugees, caring for them, resettlement. Some mention of the environment, of caring for God's creation. Probably some mention of peacemaking and economic justice.
Father, pleasure to have you on. Thanks very much. And that is your lot for this week on the Sky News Daily. Do hope you all have a lovely sunny weekend. We'll see you again Monday.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Malta Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.